Good day, everyone. My name is Kayla, and I'm content producer with Leader Associates. Welcome to the SAF APAC Summit and the interview channel. I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Kimberly Camrass, Sustainability Lead for Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific at Boeing. Dr. Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And to start off, could you briefly introduce your role at Boeing and share how your background has shaped your perspective on sustainability in aviation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kayla. So my name's Kimberly. I'm the Sustainability Lead for Boeing for Australia, New Zealand and the South Pacific. I'm part of a global sustainability engagement and partnerships team. And our main focus is to work across governments to help shape policy that's conducive to aviation decarbonisation. So obviously we're really focused on sustainable aviation fuel or SAF, but we're also looking at the other ways the sector can decarbonise through operational efficiency, fleet renewal and even market-based measures. Briefly, I have background in sustainability with a particular focus on regenerative sustainability and sustainable cities. I think it shaped my perspective of sustainability in aviation because I've seen what's possible when collectives come together to work on a sustainability goal. And so whilst it's a big challenge for the aviation sector to reach net zero by 2050, I think my background in other sectors has really helped me to believe that it's actually an achievable goal. It just relies on extensive collaboration and cooperation.
Thank you for the introduction. And how is Boeing positioning itself to accelerate the deployment of SAF across a diverse landscape while staying aligned with your global commitment to have all aircraft SAF ready by 2030?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that point around globally consistent and globally reaching commitments is really important to us. We will have our aircraft able to be 100% SAF by 2030, and that's a really important step in the net zero transition process. In terms of our focus on SAF scaling specifically, we're focused on three main areas: technology, use, and scale. When we talk about technology, that's where Boeing is leading work in looking at research and the development of new technology pathways for SAF production. But we're also talking about the development of roadmaps and of studies and data that helps inform policy. So a good example of that is the SAF roadmaps we've done in Australia, in Southeast Asia and also in Japan. We're really hoping that that technological expertise helps governments to shape appropriate and effective policy. Second element of that is use. And that's really looking at how Boeing uses SAF ourselves. We need to put our money where our mouth is and actually uptake SAF as well. We don't use as much as an airline, of course, but we do use quite a bit of fuel. So we're really focused on where can we use SAF directly, and if SAF's not available in a certain area of the world, where can we access it through book and claim? So we're really helping to drive that demand as well. And finally, and most importantly, we're focusing on scaling SAF. Policy is the biggest way we can do that. So we're working hand in glove with governments to make sure that we're providing that expertise and that global advice. But also scale can come from other mechanisms. We're working with the banking and finance sector to look at how can we enable corporates to offset or rather inset their scope 3 emissions through using SAF. So technology, use, scale, there are three pillars of how we're really helping to drive SAF acceleration.
Thank you for sharing. And the scaling SAF is not just about ambition, it's about overcoming real world obstacles. So, what are the key supply chain or infrastructure gaps that need to be addressed to scale SAF in APAC? And how is Boeing work with local stakeholders to bridge them?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a particularly challenging one for the Asia Pacific region. And one of the major supply chain challenges we have across much of APAC is a lot of our fuel is imported. You know, in Australia we import over 90% of fuel. New Zealand it's up to 100% of fuel, and you know across other areas of APAC we do also have that vulnerability that comes from importation of fuel. So really working to understand how can we scale SAF using co-processing at existing refineries, which is something we're focusing on in Korea, for example, and in Japan. But there is even opportunities to do that in Australia as well. Logistics and supply chains are complex when it comes to SAF. The fossil fuel industry has had many, many decades of establishing those supply chains and those logistics mechanisms. We're trying to do that from scratch with sustainable aviation fuel. So we're really working with governments to understand what is the best locations for some of these SAF plants? Where can we make sure that we're accessing feedstock close to where we're going to refine it into SAF and close to then where it's exported or transported elsewhere? So really looking at identifying optimum production locations is a key part of addressing some of those logistics challenges as well. I think the second thing I'd like to add with that is when we look at SAF use, we're obviously not just looking at commercial flight. We're also looking at defence forces and the reliance that they have on a steady supply of fuel. So we're working with defence forces globally, but particularly in Australia, to understand how can we support them to take up SAF for their aircraft, their defence platforms, and therefore create more energy security and sovereign risk mitigation for countries like Australia, but also the broader Asia Pacific region.
Yeah, totally agree. And Boeing is more than just an aircraft manufacturer. You are also a system integrator and ecosystem enabler. How does Boeing view its role in building the broader SAF ecosystem, particularly through collaboration with producers, airlines, airports, and governments?
So we like to say that aviation decarbonisation is a team sport. No one entity can decarbonise this sector in isolation. So we really see our role as a facilitator to bring all of those parties together to work collaboratively on aviation decarbonisation. And I'll give a couple of examples of that, if I may. We are working with our airline customers across the APAC region on SAF accounting. So I'm looking at how can we introduce best practice SAF accounting mechanisms to enable things like book and claim to help scale SAF in APAC while we're waiting for that production to actually start and then to increase. We're also bringing together, coalitions of the willing, if you like, through things like the Green Fuel Forward initiative. We recently joined a range of other parties, including Qantas and others, to work to gather corporate entities and support them in understanding how they can address their Scope 3 emissions by using SAF rather than offsetting. So across both corporate sector but also government policymakers, we're really working to convene parties together to share knowledge and then to enable SAF scaling to occur. I think another really tangible way that we're doing that, Kayla, as well, is through the use of open access tools. We have a tool called the Cascade Climate Impact Platform. That's a Boeing developed tool, but it's available to everyone globally. And it lets you model different scenarios to reach net zero by 2050 based on different locations, different feedstocks, all of the other different sorts of inputs that you can manipulate. So providing that technical expertise, but making sure that's accessible to all is really important. It's really a big way of how we're seeking to bring parties together.
Yeah, thanks. And you mentioned that policy is very important, and based on your experience with working with governments across the region, what kinds of policies or incentives has proven most effective in supporting self-development, and where do you see room for improvement?
Yes, it's a great question. And I think what our learning has really shown from the global presence that we have is that an integrated suite of policies is required. It's not optimal to only have demand signals or mandates that are not accompanied by supply side incentives. And also supply side incentives on their own are not going to be sufficient to really drive this demand quickly. So I think the key learning for us is there has to be that integrated suite of policies. Those policies need to be harmonised globally. There has to be consistency. Otherwise, we'll run into some real problems with aviation being a global industry. So that policy harmonisation is important. Having said that, our motto a little bit when it comes to policy is, globally consistent, locally nuanced. So how do we nuance policy in different areas to make sure that we're maximising the opportunities for different countries? A couple of examples of that. Singapore, we've seen the development of the SAF levy there, which essentially passes on the cost of scaling to international travellers into Singapore. It's quite a modest cost increase in the price of a ticket, and all of that funding goes directly into a government pool of funds that is directly used to invest into SAF projects. So we're seeing really nuanced and interesting policy mechanisms like that working well in Asia Pacific. I think Asia Pacific's got opportunity though. When you think about this region, it's as diverse as Japan, the South Pacific Islands, New Zealand, Australia, India, China. There's lots of different opportunities in each of those regions. So I think it's really important that we keep an awareness of the fact that what works in one country may not necessarily be able to be replicated in another, but we can certainly learn the lessons from those policy development processes and also the implementation of those policies.
Yeah, thanks again for your very detailed sharing. And finally, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what milestones or breakthroughs is Boeing targeting to help make SAF mainstream aviation fuel in this part of this world?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's nice to end on an optimistic note. We are really seeking to ensure that we see domestic production in various countries across the Asia Pacific, beyond where it's already occurring, in the lead up to 2030. So we want to see SAF flowing in Australia, in New Zealand, flowing more in Southeast Asia, and also continuing to grow and flow in countries like China. So that's critical. That domestic production in the next 5 years is absolutely imperative. We're also really looking at how we can work with global frameworks such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to help unlock ways that those frameworks can encourage corporate entities to inset their emissions using SAF rather than offsetting them out of sector. So I would really like to see in the next 2 to 3 years that some of those global frameworks help to encourage the use of SAF. And I think that's a real opportunity for the Asia Pacific. Finally, I think if we can see collaboration from a defence perspective with allies such as Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, we've got some real opportunities there to make sure that not only are our civilian aircrafts running on sustainable aviation fuel, but that missions from a defence perspective can be completed efficiently and effectively, but also more sustainably.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. King, for sharing your insights with us today. And it's clear that Boeing is playing a pivotal role in advancing self-adoption, both globally and across the APAC region. And we look forward to see how your work continues to shape the future of SAF. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla.
Very
Thank you.
much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.